Hello, BookTube, and welcome back. We continue our library tour today with fantasy. It will bring me to the end of my non-Tolkien fantasy. Tolkien and Lewis are separated from everything else, but we will see the beginning of Tolkien here as well. So I just wanted to dive right into it and show you what I've got on my shelf. So we start with the only George R.R. Martin. I picked up a relatively good copy of A Feast for Crows shortly before the book buying ban. I've read all 5 of the books in the Song of Ice and Fire series. I question whether we'll actually ever see a book 6 and 7. But even so, at the very least, if nothing else is ever published, books 1 through 3 are definitely worth reading. Books 4 and 5 are a little harder to recommend, and this is book 4. And the weird thing he did with books 4 and 5 is they cover about the same time frame. And so this covers the viewpoints of about half of the characters. And the other half are in the other book. And so you have a lot of parallel things happening across them. And unfortunately, that means if you've got a particular favorite, that they will be completely absent from one of the 2 books. Now, if you've got a lot of favorites and they happen to be divided between the 2, then that's a little bit better. But if you've got one in particular that you are watching for, waiting for, ready to read every time you finish one of their chapters, you're flipping ahead to find out where their next chapter is. Books 4 and 5 are tough to get through because one of those 2 books will not have your favorite character really at all in there. And my favorite character is Arya Stark. And I think you can see a little bit of Arya in the young version of Ava, my main character from Monster Huntress. I think she was probably one of those indirect influences on that characterization. Next we have Julian May. We have a lot more Julian May on the sci-fi shelf. But this one does say it's fantasy on the spine. So we have Blood Trillium. This is the co-author of Black Trillium, so I imagine that this is a... She created the world with Marion Zimmer Bradley and Andre Norton. Okay. So I don't know if you have to read Black Trillium first to be able to enjoy this, but at some point in time I'll get to it because it was included in my little, one of my boxes of vintage, mostly science fiction. No One Knows the Cat by Anne McCaffrey. I just read this last month. It progressed past the first round in my book battle. That video just went up the other day where I put 8 of the books that I finished in February in a book battle Jeremy Fee style, but without the awesome graphics. And I enjoyed this far more in the second half than I did in the first. The first 30 pages out of this 90-page were a little slow and not as interesting, but it picked up significantly from there. So I definitely enjoyed it. Then we have A Red Rose Chain by Seanan McGuire. This one I picked up, again, just before the book buying ban. Had a library withdrawal, so this is from the Des Moines Franklin Public Library. I've heard the name Seanan McGuire a lot on BookTube. I haven't read anything by Seanan McGuire, so I figured why not pick up something to give it a shot. And it sounded interesting. So it's an October Day novel. I don't know anything about October Day. Hopefully I don't have to read books that came before this to enjoy it. Because I'd like to know if I enjoy the author or not. Here we have one that you've seen probably recently on a couple of channels being talked about, including Criminology. And this is Elric of Melniboné. I think even Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads recently read him. And I read Elric, I think it was in December. It was either just after or right before my 100-book challenge started. So this is by Michael Moorcock. Elric of Melniboné is a really, really interesting character. He's not a protagonist you necessarily root for. He's not black and white in terms of his moral compass. but really, really interesting character. And I definitely would love to read more Elric in the future. Then we have Annals of the Witch World by Andre Norton. So this has got, inside it here, Witch World, Web of the Witch World, Year of the Unicorn. So 3 books within here. Some things are out of order. Chronicles of the Witch World by Andre Norton. So this one has 3 Against the Witch World, Warlock of the Witch World, and Sorceress of the Witch World. And then we have The Warning of Witch World. Yes, so this I think is just that one book. Yeah. So this is, I've got lots of Witch World ahead of me. I've never read anything Witch World. This was a box of what was a mix of fantasy and science fiction hardcovers. It's also where I got No One Knows the Cat. So somebody clearly was an Andre Norton fan. I'm not sure how this one got out of order. This should have been a little bit sooner. Probably at the start of this shelf, so it will go into its rightful place. But this is Shadow Moon by Chris Claremont and George Lucas. So this is one that I was really excited about when I hauled it last fall. I did my indie bookstore tour, I believe it was. And I still haven't gotten around to it. And this book and many, many others on my shelf are why I decided to hermitize away starting in March. And so I'm catching up on finishing some shorter books. I'm going to finish a couple of series. I've got one more book to finish in that series. Going to continue probably some Barsoom series from Edgar Rice Burroughs. And then I'm going to try to hit some bigger books like this that have been calling my name. And this will not be the last one that I say. This is one I've been wanting to read for a while and just haven't had a chance to get around to it. And I want to change that. John Gwynne last week with Shadow of the Gods is another one that falls in that category. As well as this, 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker. This sounds like exactly my sort of book, and why haven't I read it yet? I've had it since the fall. I'm going to change that. This may very well be the first of the fantasy books that I say, you know what, I'm going to start picking it up. Because, I mean, this is only 350 pages. So this is, in terms of a fantasy book, this is relatively short, right? Then we have The Serpent's Tooth by Diana L. Hexon. Clearly, Marion Zimmer Bradley enjoyed it very much indeed. So it's got to be good, right? Another one that I've been meaning to read for years and just haven't gotten to yet. Patrick Rothfuss, Name of the Wind. I have not read anything Rothfuss. I picked this up when I did my indie bookstore tour because I needed to pick something up and there wasn't a big selection. And I knew I needed this. So it's a little bit thicker than that 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City. The February Fantasy Stories book that I did not get around to, which I was okay with, I didn't expect to necessarily get around to, was Song of Sorcery by Elizabeth Scarborough. And the only reason it was picked was because it's under 250 pages, which would have fit what you're supposed to do for February Fantasy Stories. But it looks and sounds interesting. Another one I've been intending to read for a long time. I have not read anything by this author yet. And I wanted to read something from this author. This is Dragonbone Chair. This is book 1 of the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series by Ted Williams. And this is one that, along with The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, that I got from Beth Ann Brunga Selkilar. We did a kind of a indie bookstore swap like June or July of last year. And so those were 2 of the 3 books she sent me. I did read one of them, thankfully. But, I mean, I don't know why I'm not reading these books. But here is a book I have read before. The Once and Future King by T.H. White. I'm putting it into the fantasy because, you know, it says novel. it feels fantasy to me. It takes elements. This is, if you want a feel for the Arthurian story as a whole and want something that is more modern in its approach, this is the one to grab. It's a slower read. I relate the writing style very similar to Tolkien in terms of it's just rich, so it's slow going, but it is very worthwhile. And it's enjoyable. It's not my favorite Arthurian retelling, but I do enjoy it. But there's one I haven't read. This is the Book of Merlin, which is kind of the almost like considered the epilogue to the Once and Future King. Yeah, the true last chapter to the Once and Future King. And I have not read this. This is short. And part of me wants to reread the Once and Future King before embarking on this. But I may decide not to. I may decide just to pick this up and read it. If you've read it, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that book. A couple of books that I got from a good friend last year, I believe for my birthday, and I haven't had a chance to get around to. The Sorcerer Metamorphosis by Jack White. So this is Arthurian Tail. And The Skystone by Jack White. So this is part of that Camelot Chronicles. It is one of the most interesting historical novels I've ever read. So maybe it should be with historical fiction. Who knows? We'll find out as I read it. Got 2 more in fantasy, or 3 more in fantasy, and then we'll be into Tolkien. So we've got The Eagle by Jack White. So this is the concluding volume of the Camelot Chronicles. So you can see I got that also from that library book sale. We've got a series that Steve Donahue strongly recommends, and that is the Legends of the Condor Heroes. This is book 1, A Hero Born by Jin Yong, that I definitely want to read. This is another one I really, really, really want to get around to. Book 4, I think it was, just came out last fall. I'm sure Steve read it last year. He could tell us all about it. But one I did read just last month, a fantasy medley. So this has got 4 stories in there. The highlight, and the only real highlight to me, was Words Like Coins by Robin Hobb. But I'm still glad I got it. I got this one from that same library sale, but I didn't want to keep the plastic wrapped with the barcode and all of that cover. I figured I'd just make it a nice plain hardcover and get rid of the outer covering. And now we go into Tolkien. But before we go into Tolkien, you might be asking yourself, I recently watched Mount Rushmore from David. And he mentioned 4 fantasy authors. He mentioned J.R.R. Tolkien, which we're going to see some Tolkien now, and we're going to see some more next week. We saw Robert E. Howard last week. He's got a couple of Robert E. Howard, once more. We saw some Robin Hobb last week. And again, probably once more. But there's one other author that was mentioned on there and has not been shown at all on any of these shelves to date. And we are through the span of time in which this author could appear. And that author is Brandon Sanderson. So you might be saying, where is your Brandon Sanderson? And the short answer is I don't own anything in Brandon Sanderson yet. I've read most of what Brandon Sanderson has written. And all of that has been through a combination of library books and audiobooks. It's something that I want to change at some point in time. Obviously, there's no immediate urgency because I've read them already. But at this point in time, maybe that's the right thing to be picking up, is to fleshing out the ones I have read and would like to reread again. And I think Brandon Sanderson's going to qualify there. I would gladly reread just about anything that he wrote that I've read so far. I'm actually currently just picked up from the library last week, Steelheart, to give that a reread. That's book 1 in the Reckoners series, which is a kind of a young adult superhero series where the superheroes, the people that get superpowers, all turn bad. And so dealing with that, and it's just a really, really fascinating premise. And I just love the book. And I played about 2 weeks ago a board game based off of the Reckoner series. And it immediately made me want to go pick that book up and reread it again. And so I want to get that trilogy at some point in time to reread that trilogy. Probably just going to reread Steelheart right now and content myself to that as my one deviance from my 100 book challenge, because I'm breezing through it. I read close to 100 pages this morning already, and I'm just absolutely enjoying it. But I mean, there isn't a thing that Brandon Sanderson has written that I would not want to own. Maybe not Alcatraz. I've only read the first one of those. That's kind of a middle grade book, but middle grade March. Maybe I should give Alcatraz another shot. But yeah, I don't have Brandon Sanderson. I think the only other thing that he's written I haven't read yet is the Skyward series, his little young adult science fiction series. I definitely want to read those. But yeah, Brandon Sanderson is absent from my shelf, and won't be forever. I'll definitely be picking up Brandon Sanderson stuff in the future. But now we go to Tolkien after that little aside. So we have the Annotated Hobbit. This was a gift for me from Tori at Hufflepuff Discovery. I'm still so grateful. I read this last year in December for my Hobbit read-along and had a blast reading all of the side notes and the annotations and seeing the drawings and all of that are included in there, and just really enjoyed it. And then the one that I'm working my way through right now, the Lord of the Rings. So this is that brand new edition that's illustrated with illustrations by J.R.R. Tolkien that I got from my wonderful wife for Christmas. And again, I take off the slipcover as I'm reading it. I am through Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm about to start into the Two Towers sometime this month. And then the last 3 volumes kind of all go together. This is History of Middle-earth Part 1, so it's got the first 5 books. So Book of Lost Tales Part 1 and 2, Lays of Beleriand, The Shaping of Middle-earth and the Lost Road, and Other Writings. We have Part 2 with The Return of the Shadow, The Treason of Isengard, The War of the Ring, and Sauron Defeated. And Part 3 with Morgoth's Ring, The War of the Jewels, and the Peoples of Middle-earth. I've read only of these. I've only read the Book of Lost Tales Part 1. I've got 11 more books to read through there. And maybe that would be a worthwhile venture to do as part of this 100-book challenge. Just try to just get through the 11 in here that I have not read. Because I don't knock 11 off of there. And they're ones I've wanted to read for years. And again, my wife wonderfully got those for me, I think last spring. Maybe it was the fall before. But I'm so happy to have them and want to get back to reading those at some point in time. And just like everything else, it's I don't know why. I don't know why I haven't read them yet. I want to read them. I need to read them. So I look forward to your bookshelf tour. I'm seeing some more people starting to make some shelf tours, and that gets me so excited. And so I can't wait to see what all of you have on your shelves and to hear you talk about your books and, pick a shelf, pick a couple of books, pick a genre, however you want to do it. There's no wrong way. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more installments coming for the library tour. Next week we get through Tolkien and Lewis, and then we start going into ancient history, ancient literature. So you'll see some good volumes there. I hope you have a great day. Thank you, BookTube.